All right, today we're jumping into a framework that honestly challenges some of the biggest assumptions about how a spiritual message ought to be shared. The book we're looking at, From Heathen to Heaven, makes a bold claim that the Bible isn't just a collection of verses, but a specific step-by-step curriculum for a person's entire spiritual life. Let's dive in.
You know the verse, right? John 3:16. You see it everywhere. Signs at football games, bumper stickers. It's called the gospel in a nutshell. But the author of this book kicks things off with a pretty provocative question. Is that famous verse, pulled out of its context, always the right message for every audience, every time? The book's answer is a hard no.
So what's the big deal with leading with a verse like that? Well, the author argues that when we just pick and choose verses because they have marketing appeal, we risk, mangling the message. By ignoring the original sequence, the original context, it can get so twisted that it actually becomes something else entirely. The book calls this approach serendipitous.
And this serendipitous method, it leads to what the source calls a buffet-style ministry. Come and get it. Take whatever you want. It might feel really welcoming and accessible, but the book's argument is that it's just not biblically faithful. And in the end, it's not even effective, because it's ignoring a prescribed divine order.
Okay, so if the pick-and-choose buffet is off the table, what's the alternative? Well, this is where it gets really interesting. The author proposes that the Bible isn't just a grab bag of useful quotes. It actually contains a very specific, lifelong curriculum for a person's spiritual journey.
And this curriculum is broken down into 4 clear stages. Each one has its own unique syllabus, its own lesson plan, totally tailored to where a person is on their path. And it makes sense, right? You wouldn't hand a calculus textbook to a first grader who's just learning to count. The author's applying that exact same logic to spiritual teaching.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty, because the most counterintuitive, the most surprising part of this whole model is the very first message. This is the lesson plan for an audience with zero biblical context. The author uses the term heathen, which, I know it might sound a bit old-fashioned, but it's really just being used here to describe someone at the absolute beginning of this path, square one.
Now, just look at this. The contrast is, wow, it's stark. On the left, you've got the common, friendly opening lines we hear all the time. But on the right, that's the script the author pulls from passages like Acts 17. Instead of starting with comfort, it starts with a command to fear. Instead of a promise, it starts with a warning of judgment. It's a completely different starting line.
And to make the point even sharper, get this, the author creates this long list of things you should specifically exclude at this first stage. This is radical. I mean, the very things we often think are the core of the message, Jesus, the cross, God's love, even John 3:16 itself, are considered contextually inappropriate for this first conversation. The argument is that these ideas are just meaningless without the right foundation.
So, if you can't talk about all that stuff, what is there left to say? Well, the message for stage 1 is all about these foundational truths. It establishes the creator God versus false gods. It talks about his provision for all of us, the reality of a coming judgment, and a really simple command to repent. It's all summarized by the acronym FGW, Fear God, Glorify Him, and Worship Him. And the proof for all of it, the resurrection of the appointed judge.
Now, to help us really visualize this whole step-by-step approach, the author uses this fantastic metaphor that just flips the entire modern strategy on its head. It's called the reverse cornucopia. You know what a cornucopia is, right? That horn of plenty just spilling out all the best fruits and goodies from its wide open front. The book says that's how most modern evangelism works. It's a marketing strategy. You put all the most attractive, delicious-looking parts, love, forgiveness, heaven, right up front to draw people in. But the book argues we need to turn that cornucopia completely around. The journey doesn't start with the wide-open buffet of benefits. No, it begins at the narrow tip, with a very pointed, very focused 15-second message about a creator and a coming judgment. And this table just brings the whole thing into focus. You start with that narrow 15-second FGW message at the tip. For anyone who responds to that, the message widens out at stage 2 with an hour of teaching all about Christ. Then, a spiritual babe moves on to what the Bible calls a milk diet of core doctrines to build a solid foundation. And finally, the spiritually mature get to spend the rest of their lives engaging with the solid food of deep theology, exploring the whole wide horn of the gospel.
So really, the crucial point, the whole takeaway, is this. The author is calling for a massive shift away from a marketing mindset to a sequence-based one. It's about trusting and following the order that's presented in the biblical text, instead of trying to reorder it for what we think might be more effective or easier to swallow.
This model, it really does propose a radical, incredibly disciplined shift in how we communicate, moving away from a buffet to a prescribed curriculum. And it leaves us with a final thought, a really big question to chew on. What would actually change in our ministries, in our churches, in our personal conversations, if this sequential, curriculum-based model were widely adopted? That's something to think about.